This is Wantop Lavoya College, Certificate 3 in Theology and Ministry. And this is the introduction video for the unit Apply Spirituality for Indigenous Christians, or as we'll more regularly refer to as Indigenous Christian Spirituality. This introduction has just introduced you to the book. We have a wonderful opportunity with the digital format to reintroduce the original teaching from one of the college's original Indigenous teachers. We're making this available after 12 months after the pastor has passed away, and we have permission from his family to continue to use this material. So I'll just share with you the book. What we have is a number of recordings from the pastor, and each of the recordings here on YouTube that we can access in video format will basically have a still screen which looks like this for each of these 7 recordings. I'm just going to describe what they're going to be like in a little while. So as we scroll down, this is what the book looks like from 2020, and 10 lessons, but the 10 lessons, 9 of the 10 lessons are contained in the 7 recordings. The recordings are actually video recordings of Pastor done back in the 1980s. The book has been revised a couple of times since by a number of our Indigenous teachers. And one of the points we wanted to make is the traditional stories that are included in this unit have been approved for sharing and teaching at Wantop College by their respective traditional owners and the elders. Each of the lessons in this unit, there'll be some input by the pastor, and then you'll have an opportunity to reflect and write some thoughts afterwards. The inspiration for doing this series in this format has been that we've been in the last few years working with a number of students who are for whom English is not their first language, often their third or their fourth. And because the content of this book is largely a transcript of the pastor's teaching, we thought it was good to be able to get those words spoken. And for people for whom English is not their first language, being able to listen to the pastor teach may actually be a useful way of doing it. One of the other things that was really useful with this is that the recordings are original audio cassette recordings done in an actual classroom, and there is class discussion and pausing while pastor uses the whiteboard or the blackboard, and praying and worship times and some things that happen in language. So they're all really good experiences, particularly for those of you who in 2020 are unable to experience those things in person. The college is absolutely delighted to be able to express gratitude to the pastor's family for continued permission to use his stories and teaching for future generations of Indigenous leaders. And I really strongly encourage you to have a look at this interview. I believe we have some of this in some of the other videos that I'm hoping we can actually put up as part of the Wantop Library collection. Just unique stories, and it gives a wonderful background. The background to this particular set of recordings is, back in the 80s, Pastor did actually record this class in Rockhampton, and these lessons form the basis of the book. There are things that come in later on, and I'll talk about those in a moment, but there are 7 recordings, and a couple of ways of getting them. What you're likely to be hearing from 2020, from September 2020, is that these will be available on the YouTube channel, and as a student you'll be sent access to that. So the first recording We'll start actually at page, in the 2020 book, at page 9, not on page 8 where you would start reading. You would start looking at it, and the questions that get asked is, who am I, where do I come from, where do I belong? Some really essential questions for Indigenous Christians, establish where they fit in God's creation. And knowing that is a really important part of developing your whole Indigenous spiritual identity. I think it's also important for people of other cultures as well, but absolutely essential here. So that it begins at section 1.2 on page 9. The recording does not talk about the Gellam story, which is in your book. And the Gellam story has been included at 1.11 on page 12. It was included when we had a number of Torres Strait Islander students begin to join the college. Initially, the college was known as Wantop, and later on, as our numbers increased from Torres Strait, we added the 2 Torres Strait language words for light, B and Boya, so we become Wantop B Boya. And what you'll find is you won't be able to read word for word in the book from the recording. So, but I encourage you, when you get to the lesson's end in the recording, you can usually answer the questions that are in the book, because the questions were actually formulated on the basis of what the pastor had taught. And but the beauty about the recording is you do have some class discussion where pastor actually answers a number of the questions coming from members of the class. So the first part of the lesson is largely lesson 1, lesson 2. The second recording, and each of these recordings goes for about 90 minutes, begins with the class discussion at the end of lesson 2. Lesson 3 begins about 20 minutes in. So, and I've put a couple of markers in there. The final 10 minutes is worship in English and language. And the very end of it is the beginning of the next lesson. The third recording is a bit longer than lesson 3 in your book. In fact, I think for the final format of the book, that was actually tidied up a bit. It takes an hour and 10 minutes to get to the end of lesson 4 and classroom discussion. And again, the last 5 minutes is the beginning of lesson 5. Recording 4 starts at lesson 5.4, so it doesn't quite match. And the contents are fairly similar to the book, but not quite the same. And the last 20 minutes is lesson 6. And then recording 5, which is the biggest departure from the book, begins with lesson 6. The halfway point is the beginning of lesson 7 and ends with some language singing. Now, one of the things that is important, the second recording that I'll be doing for this set of resources is to read lesson 8 of this book, because it's not covered exactly in the recordings. There's other extra detail which I encourage you to listen to. I found it quite useful as a non-Indigenous person to listen to pastor teaching on this. Some of the same material is covered, but a lot of the discussion actually arises out of some classroom questions. And there's a lot of other extra detail and healing. And for the book, it's been shortened and changed a fair bit. And this recording should allow you to answer the questions at the end of lesson 9. And some of that lesson 8. And lesson 6 starts lesson 9. The last 40 minutes of the recording are not in the book, but they're, again, really good material. And the last 10 minutes is the beginning of the last lesson. And recording 7 deals with the last lesson and ends with worship time. So what I've got on screen at the moment is each of the individual lessons, and it's lesson 8 that is not covered in the recordings, though other material covers the same area. So this is introduction. Enjoy every student who does this really does appreciate this particular unit and its companion unit. Indigenous Christian spirituality and gospel and culture are two of the signature units of Wantop Baboya College. One part of the process we want you to get is a sense of confidence in your own Indigenous identity as an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, from whichever mob you're part of, and to gain confidence and being able to speak the Christian truth as a man or a woman of your mob in a way that actually transcends and transforms. We want you to gain that confidence. So these two units are like that. We haven't offered them before in 2020 because initially we were still hoping we would be able to have a full face-to-face block at the end of the year. And these units, the video resources are no substitute for doing this in class. One of the great joys that I have is I don't actually get to teach these, but as you walk past the class where whoever the aunt or the uncle is who's teaching the lesson, the amount of laughter, the amount of joy, the amount of hope that radiates out of those classes is phenomenal. So if you're accessing this online, please enjoy, and I will join you again briefly for lesson 8.